The first day of e-tolling on Johannesburg's highways has come and gone, and now I'm joined via Google Hangout by John Clark, a spokesperson for OUTA, to discuss the decision. John, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Now, the reaction to e-tolling online has mostly been negative, which I'm sure is no surprise to you. How have you experienced the first day?
So for me, it was a bit of a non-event. I mean, all that's now happened is the money is starting to flow into SANRAL's coffers. I have great admiration for the technology at stake, but I'm actually outraged at the fact that this government should actually now be trying to go back, take us back into the past in terms of trying to achieve manipulated consent to actually force people into an unpopular, inefficient, and unworkable.
Now, OUTA's Wayne Duvenage has said that there is no law that requires road users to buy an e-tag or register with SANRAL in order to use Gauteng's freeways. But in light of the court cases that have been lost by OUTA and other interest groups, does OUTA still stand by that?
In fact, we go further and we say there is a law which obliges the state to respect the fundamental human rights of its population. And the law is in the Bill of Rights. It insists on the right of access to information. We are saying to people that if you buy an e-tag, you are now entering into a contract with SANRAL, and they're trying to make the sort of the implication that somehow by not doing so you're breaking the law. On the contrary, you have a right as a person engaging in a contract to know what you're signing up for. And in this instance, it's not just about reading the small print. It's trying to find what isn't even disclosed in the small print. The actual verifiable facts about who the other parties and stakeholders to this contract are. The legal issues are one thing, but this for me has become an ethical issue. It's a moral issue, and that's why we have church leaders coming out. We're saying that this has to be questioned on that basis. And I'm afraid there's been no answer of any conviction. I mean, interestingly, Andrew Marseille is a transport economist for SANRAL. He's actually a friend of mine. So happens he's also a Christian, and we talk about these things at different levels. But he said, yes, the fuel levy fund is a more efficient form of collecting revenue for road building in terms of cost and benefit. He says, however, it is where there are other objectives that are necessary, was take a kind of a discount on the efficiency for the sake of greater effectiveness. And when he talked about greater effectiveness of what? Of the greater urban transport management system. And it's a way of actually saying to people, if you want nice fancy roads, well, you need to pay for them, and then that money must go and cross-subsidize investment in public transport systems. We're not seeing that. You saw what happened, and yesterday we saw that all the alternative routes were clogged up. The point is a serious point, is can we get an integration of private road users, because Andrew Marseille makes a valid point that only 16% of people in Gauteng own cars. What about the majority? I'm a social worker. I'm wanting a pro-poor, system, and in theory, e-tolls could work if it was going to, in a sense, take money from people that could afford the luxury of the fancy freeway in order to cross-subsidize those who can't. We haven't got that, and it's part of me feels really kind of quite sad to think that we've got a technology that could do it, but it's not the technology here. It's not because the fact that they haven't been able to integrate is because there is no integrity. Now, integration and integrity are kind of sister words. And so for me, that's again back to the issue of the political and moral framework that encompasses e-tolling. And we're seeing all sorts of other issues in the country which people are protesting about, and we're seeing people opposing e-tolls, even though they might in theory agree with it, just because they're fed up with what's happening, for example, in Kandla and the wastage of money and all that sort of stuff. So, and I mean, I wouldn't want to be in government at the moment. It's a tough job, and I have great empathy and sympathy for them. But what I would want to do is for the government, the first rule of holes, if you're in a hole, stop digging.
Absolutely. John, Let's talk about what could possibly be the next course of action for OUTA. Unfortunately, court proceedings have come to nothing, and it's the system is rolling out now. It's going ahead. So what's the next port of call for OUTA?
Well, we continue to raise money, and people are welcome from all parts, even in Cape Town and Durban, because this is a symptomatic of a much larger issue. Because for all what we have learned through this, this 18 months of of what we call lawfare, is that the case has not yet been heard and adjudged. We argued that the fundamental problem with e-tolling, that it was unlawful because there was a failure to publicly consult by the minister in Samuel in 2007, 2008, and as a consequence, that they failed to meet the first test of valid legal legislation, lack of consultation, as required by the Samuel Act and the Constitution and other things. So that case hasn't been heard. All the judges did was say, sorry, we're not condoning your late application, because in terms of the the complexities of administrative law, you have to, 180 days, and this whole thing was sneaked past us without people being aware until the gantry started coming up. And then they suddenly realized, hey, what's happened here? I mean, they only had something like 28 replies from 3.5 million motorists in 2008. You can hardly call that sort of, and one got a sense, and this is purely like reading the body language of the Supreme Court of Appeal judges, is that they saw our point. But the whole problem is that they were dealing with was that under administrative law, there's certain rules and procedures which don't apply under criminal law. So they said to us, well, when somebody brings a defense against not paying e-tolls on the grounds that they believe it to be an unjust law, we will hear it. And then we'll be able to make our case. So that's another reason why we're saying to people, don't be intimidated by Samuel. And the very way in which Samuel, and sadly the Minister of Transport, is playing this, is to give people a sense of uncertainty. Oh, what is going to happen to me? And they've been very convenient and sparing with the detail. And we've actually wanting to say, be explicit. Is this going to be prosecuted under criminal procedures or under the OUTA Act? And there's no clarity in that one. So, and the only way people can resolve that ambiguity and that uncertainty is they go and buy an e-tag. And when they do that, they're now contracted. So it's a different ballgame. So we say to people, don't buy an e-tag because you have a right, and human rights don't belong to government. Certainly don't belong to Sanral. They belong to you as a citizen. And that is what's paramount in this instance. So don't be intimidated.
But John, it is a fair argument to say that people could be legally responsible for not buying an e-tag, and there could be repercussions for people who don't buy an e-tag. Now, by OUTA encouraging people to not buy e-tags or not register with SANRAL, they're not going to take the responsibility for defaulting on those payments. The payment's essentially going to fall on the road user. So what's your response to that?
Well, yeah, they can, if they buy an e-tag, they've now contracted, and therefore they have an obligation to pay. Just as I sign up for DSTV or whatever subscription, I have a contract, well, I've got to pay, and if I don't pay, well, I'm in trouble. That's what they're trying to do. You don't have to legally buy an e-tag. If you do buy an e-tag, well, then you have legal obligations in terms of that contract. So that you see the subtlety of that is very important. And you can, and for me, it's almost like Sanral's giving the game away by trying to the whole campaign is slanted towards herding people towards playing on a ground which they know that they hold the cards. And we are saying as OUTA, don't go and play on their terrain, stay on our terrain. And what is our terrain? It's the citizens' rights terrain, and that's why we're saying this Defiance campaign, it hasn't actually come to even civil disobedience in terms of that technical stage of breaking an unjust law. You're well within your rights to not sign that contract. They will try and penalize you because you'll then have to pay by another means, and they'll actually invoice you, etc., etc. Well, you must insist that's how you want it done, and see if they've got the administrative capacity to handle that. And until eventually it gets to the point where they actually say, okay, you have now driven on our roads, You actually have run up an account which is 5.8 times more that you would have got as a discount, and you're not paying it, so now you're liable for a kind of a criminal charges. Then I'd say, welcome, charge me. Then I go to court, and I'll argue that case that this was an unlawful act in the first place, and you have no obligation to obey an unjust law.
You've spoken a little bit about next year, but 2014 will also potentially be the year that sees e-tolls rolled out in KZN. Will OUTA be involved in that process or in protesting that process?
I mean, OUTA, it's our supporters are basically, we see ourselves as a resource of information, of trying to disabuse, the public and the government of the way in which the arguments the false arguments they make. So whatever serves to build up a kind of a sense of concerted citizen action, we will support that, and we do that on the authority of no less a eminent person as Dr. Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland, former UN High Commissioner of Human Rights. There's a lovely saying which I quote in my book: "The arc of the moral universe bends slowly, but it bends towards justice." So, and that Martin Luther King found that as great inspiration to him in the civil rights struggle. I found it a great help to me. And all I want to say, can't we bend that arc a little bit more kind of like decidedly so that it's not such a slow movement? And unfortunately, and that's what I think OUTA is doing. We like taking the thing and bending it down so that there's a kind of a more rapid trajectory towards justice in the country. Whereas on the other hand, you've got Sanral and Nazar Ali, these are kind of like pushing it in the opposite direction. I must ask my friends at Piro to do a sketch around that. I think it lends itself to a nice cartoon, and I hope, to kind of just express in a symbolic sense of what's at stake here. And I mean, I see, it's been very great working with Wayne and with OUTA folk, because we've seen people who've got, undeniable kind of integrity, giving leadership in the situation. I mean, these are not kind of like, thugs and bullies and lawbreakers. I mean, these are people that care about the country.
John, thank you so much for joining us today. One last final word from OUTA. Would that be don't buy an e-tag?
Absolutely. Don't be forced and manipulated by fear to do anything. Least of all, buy an e-tag. Because if you do that, you're on their playing field rather than on the citizens' playing field.
Thank you very much for joining us today.